I didn't lose myself all at once. I gave myself away in pieces. At the time, it didn't feel like loss. It felt like adaptation. Like learning how the world works. Like being smart enough to understand what was expected of me and becoming that. People praised me for it. They said I was flexible. Easy to work with. Mature for my age. Someone who knew how to fit in. What they didn't see was how often I asked the same quiet question and then ignored it. What do I want? The first time I remember silencing it, I was young enough to believe that wanting the wrong thing could permanently damage your life. I had an opinion, clear, instinctive, mine. And when I voiced it, the room went quiet. Not angry. Not hostile. Disappointed. Someone explained, gently, why that wasn't realistic. Why I should think differently. Why my idea didn't make sense in the real world. I nodded. That nod mattered more than I knew. I learned something important that day: approval was conditional. And if I wanted it, I needed to adjust. So I did. I started listening more than speaking. Observing reactions. Studying which versions of myself were welcomed and which caused discomfort. Slowly, carefully, I refined myself into something acceptable. It worked. Doors opened. Opportunities came. People trusted me. I was told I had potential. That I was going places. The strange thing was how little resistance it required once I got used to it. Each compromise felt small. Temporary. Reasonable. I told myself I was being practical. What I didn't realize was that practicality was becoming my personality. Whenever I felt a pull toward something uncertain, an idea, a direction, a desire that didn't align with expectations, I checked it against the invisible standard I had absorbed. Will this make things harder? Will this disappoint someone? Will this complicate my life? If the answer was yes, I stepped back. Not dramatically. Politely. Over time, my decisions stopped coming from curiosity and started coming from consensus. I chose paths that had already been approved by others. I trusted external validation more than my own instinct, because instinct had proven unreliable in the past. Or so I believed. People around me began to describe me in ways that should have felt affirming. You're so grounded. You always make the right choices. You're exactly where you should be. I smiled when they said it. Inside, something felt wrong. It was subtle at first. A dull pressure when I imagined the future. A strange emptiness after achievements that were supposed to mean something. I assumed this was normal, that adulthood simply felt this way. I told myself I would feel fulfilled once I reached the next milestone. Once I proved myself enough. Once I earned the right to want things on my own terms. But the milestones kept moving. And my voice kept getting quieter. The more I let others define what made sense for me, the harder it became to hear myself at all. When people asked what I wanted, my mind went blank, not because I didn't care, but because I no longer trusted the answer. I learned to defer. What do you think? I'm open to anything. Whatever works best. Those phrases became second nature. They made life smoother. They kept conflict away. They made me reliable. They also erased my edges. There was a moment, years later, when someone made a decision that affected my life deeply. They didn't ask for my input. They assumed they knew what was best for me. And the worst part was this: they were right. Not because they understood me, but because I had trained them to. I had spent so long letting others decide my direction that my absence from the decision-making process felt natural, logical, expected. That realization landed hard. I wasn't being overlooked. I was being continued. The life I was living wasn't chosen by me, but it wasn't forced either. It was shaped by 1,000 moments where I stayed quiet, nodded, adapted, and told myself I could reclaim myself later. Later never came. Instead, I woke up one day with a life that fit me perfectly on paper and felt foreign everywhere else. A life that reflected everyone's expectations and none of my instincts. I didn't hate it. That was the problem. I was functional, successful, stable, and completely disconnected from the person I might have been if I had ever insisted on becoming myself. That's when the fear finally arrived. Not fear of failure. Fear of never knowing who I was without permission. Once that fear settled in, it changed how I saw everything. I started noticing how often my life felt like a response instead of an initiative. How my days were filled with reactions to expectations I hadn't consciously agreed to, but had absorbed anyway. I wasn't steering. I was adjusting. And adjusting is exhausting. I tried to remember the last time I had made a decision without checking how it would be received. Without imagining someone else's disappointment. Without weighing approval against desire. The memory was distant. Unreliable. I realized that my inner dialogue wasn't actually mine anymore. It was a collection of borrowed voices, teachers, supervisors, family, culture, each one offering advice that sounded reasonable and responsible. Together, they formed a chorus that drowned out instinct. I told myself that instinct was immature, emotional, unsafe. I trusted logic instead. Strategy. Consensus. But logic without identity is hollow. The first cracks appeared in moments that should have felt rewarding. Achievements that earned praise but left me strangely unmoved. Compliments that described a version of me I didn't feel connected to. You're doing great. You're exactly where you should be. You made the right call. Each sentence landed like a confirmation of something I wasn't sure I wanted confirmed. I began to feel like I was living someone else's idea of a good life, and performing it well enough that no one questioned it. That's the danger of adaptation. When you're good at it, no one notices the cost. The cost appeared quietly. I felt it as hesitation when asked open-ended questions. As irritation when plans changed unexpectedly. As anxiety when I had to make choices without clear guidelines. I had lost the ability to want without justification. Desire now came with a requirement to explain itself. To defend its usefulness. To prove it wouldn't disrupt anything important. Most desires failed that test. So I dismissed them. Over time, my emotional range narrowed. Not dramatically, just enough to be noticeable when I paid attention. I felt calm, but not alive. Engaged, but not invested. Proud, but not fulfilled. I told myself this was adulthood. I was wrong. Adulthood isn't about erasing yourself to maintain harmony. It's about choosing consciously which parts of yourself you're willing to compromise, and which ones you're not. I had compromised everything by default. The breaking point didn't come as a breakdown. It came as clarity. I was asked a question that required honesty, not flexibility. Someone wanted to know what I wanted to do next. No suggestions. No expectations attached. Just me. My mind went blank. Not because I didn't have options, but because I didn't trust myself to choose one without external validation. That moment terrified me. I saw how dependent I had become on permission. How much of my identity was built around being approved of. How carefully I had shaped myself to be chosen by others, by institutions, by roles, by systems, without ever choosing myself. I had been waiting for someone to tell me who I was allowed to be. And no one was coming. That realization hurt more than regret. Regret at least implies an alternative you didn't take. What I was facing was emptiness where preference should have been. I didn't know what I liked, what I valued, what I wanted enough to defend. Not clearly. The fear deepened, but it also sharpened. It forced me to confront something I had avoided for years. If I didn't decide who I was, others always would. And they wouldn't be cruel about it. They would be practical. They would choose what was easiest to manage. Most efficient. Least disruptive. They would continue the version of me I had already given them. That night, I sat alone and tried to answer a simple question without filters. If no one was watching. If no one needed me to be reasonable. If approval didn't matter. Who would I choose to become? The answer didn't arrive immediately. But the silence that followed felt different from before. It wasn't empty. It was waiting. The silence didn't give me answers right away. It gave me space. That was new. For years, silence had meant absence, of direction, of certainty, of permission. This silence felt different. It didn't rush to fill itself with borrowed opinions or reasonable compromises. It waited. And waiting, this time, wasn't avoidance. It was attention. I started paying attention to what pulled at me when no one was looking. Not the things that sounded impressive or responsible, but the small, almost embarrassing curiosities I had learned to dismiss. The interests that had no clear outcome. The preferences that didn't fit neatly into the life I had built. At first, it felt unsafe to acknowledge them. Like stepping outside without checking the weather. My instinct was still to filter, to ask whether these inclinations made sense, whether they were allowed. I stopped asking. Not because I was suddenly brave, but because I was tired of being absent. The first decision I made purely for myself wasn't dramatic. It didn't upend my life. It was almost disappointingly ordinary. But it was mine, unapproved, unexplained. And when I made it, something inside me shifted. Not relief. Not excitement. Ownership. That feeling scared me more than fear ever had. Because ownership comes with responsibility. If I chose and it went wrong, I wouldn't be able to hide behind expectations or consensus. I would have to live with the outcome as mine. For a long time, that risk had kept me compliant. Now, it became the point. I started noticing how often I had confused guidance with control. How easily advice turns into identity if you accept it without question. How often I had mistaken being chosen for choosing. I didn't rebel. I didn't reject everyone's input. I simply stopped defaulting to it. When someone asked what I wanted, I resisted the urge to redirect the question. When I felt uncertain, I stayed with that uncertainty instead of outsourcing it. When I felt resistance, I listened instead of explaining it away. This didn't make life smoother. It made it real. Some people reacted with confusion. Others with subtle resistance. A few with disappointment. They were used to a version of me that fit easily into their plans, their timelines, their assumptions. I understood that. I had helped create that version. Letting it go felt like betraying an unspoken contract. One that said I would remain agreeable, predictable, easy to place. Breaking that contract came with consequences. Some relationships shifted. Some opportunities evaporated. Some doors closed quietly once it became clear I wasn't going to keep playing the role that made everything convenient. That hurt. But it hurt cleanly. Not like the old ache of living someone else's life. Not like the quiet resentment of being continued instead of consulted. This pain made sense. I learned that disappointment is often the sound of expectations adjusting. And while it's uncomfortable, it's also honest. The longer I chose for myself, the clearer something became. I wasn't late to my life. I had just never entered it. I had spent years being defined by alignment, fitting into systems, roles, narratives that promised stability in exchange for compliance. And they delivered. My life was stable. Ordered. Approved. It just wasn't inhabited. Now, slowly, imperfectly, I was moving in. I won't pretend it was easy. Some days I missed the clarity of external direction. The relief of knowing exactly what was expected. The comfort of being praised for doing the right thing. But I remembered what that comfort had cost me. I remembered the numb achievements. The borrowed pride. The quiet dread of realizing I could live an entire life without ever choosing it. So when doubt returned, and it did, I asked myself a different question than before. Is this choice aligned with who I'm trying to please, or who I'm trying to become? That question didn't always give me a clear answer. But it gave me a compass. I didn't suddenly discover a perfect identity waiting beneath the layers of adaptation. There was no dramatic revelation. No final version of myself stepping forward fully formed. There was only practice. Practice choosing. Practice listening. Practice tolerating the discomfort of not being universally approved of. Over time, something unexpected happened. My voice came back. Not louder. Not more confident. Just present. I could feel when something mattered to me now. I could feel when a decision belonged to me instead of to the situation. I stopped asking for permission to exist as myself. And the fear that had once terrified me, the fear of being without guidance, changed shape. It became respect. Respect for how difficult it actually is to choose a life without a script. Respect for the courage it takes to disappoint expectations that once defined you. Respect for the slow, unglamorous work of becoming someone by decision instead of default. I let them decide who I would become for a long time. Not because they were malicious. Because I was accommodating. And accommodation, when unchecked, turns into surrender. If you're listening to this and you recognize yourself, the adaptable one, the reasonable one, the person who fits so well into what's needed that no one asks what you need, I won't tell you to reject everything that shaped you. But I will tell you this. If you don't decide who you are, others will do it for you. They won't mean harm. They won't force you. They'll simply continue the version of you that's easiest to manage. And one day, you'll wake up with a life that works perfectly, for everyone else. I didn't lose myself in a single moment. I gave myself away slowly. And choosing to take myself back didn't look like rebellion. It looked like finally standing inside my own life, uncertain, imperfect, unapologetically present. For the first time, that felt like becoming someone worth being loyal to. Myself.